Good evening, St Paul's. I hope we are well. I've always been a fan of the underdogs. Ask those who know me and my love for my football team, Charlton. A team with a sense of history, but for a lot of the time, they're the underdogs, whether it's in cup finals, relegation fights, or playoff battles. Who of us doesn't love an underdog? This evening, I'm focusing on Genesis 21, the story of Hagar and Ishmael being sent away, underdogs in their own right. Hagar, the Egyptian slave and handmaid who lives with Abraham and Sarah, is one of the Abrahamic tradition's primary women. She is the mother of Abraham's eldest son Ishmael, and through him the matriarch of multiple Arab tribes, revered by Islam and acknowledged by Hebrew and Christian traditions. Hagar is mentioned twice in Genesis and then referred to in Galatians by Paul. Ishmael, although quite crucial to the story in Genesis and of course Abraham, seems to disappear after today's reading in Genesis 21. Ishmael's sons do not become the rivals of Israel which everyone expects, and his son Kadir gets mentioned for his signature black tents in the book Song of Solomon. So why is this story important? Perhaps it is to do with the underdogs. Stories which aren't always told, or we hear a bit of it and wish that there was a happy ending. In order to understand Genesis 21, we have to go back to Genesis 16 to find out where we first come across Hagar. Hagar is an Egyptian name, and it's closely linked to the Arabic word meaning flight. She is familiar to us because of her history with Muhammad, who was a descendant of hers. The name might have taken on adaptation of her original name to the circumstances of her life, and can also mean fugitive or immigrant, which Hagar becomes. The Bible gives us no genealogy of her, but legend has given us a hint to her background as being the daughter of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, the same one who coveted the possession of Sarah back in Genesis chapter 12. The source affirms that the Egyptian princess became so attached to Sarah that she told her royal father that she would rather accompany Abraham back to his place. Better to be a handmaid in the tents of Abraham than a princess in this palace. We're warming to Hagar. Go Hagar! Elizabeth Tracy, in her essay Hagar, She Who Speaks to God, says this: Hagar becomes an important component in Abraham and Sarah's desperate need for a child. She becomes Abraham's concubine, and yet they fail to see Hagar as a whole person, never calling her by her name. She is seen as an object. She's used as a surrogate for the child Sarah is unable to conceive, and Sarah treats her harshly. Genesis 16 verse 6, Your slave is in your hands, Abram said. Do with her whatever you best pleases. And Hagar flees from this abuse to the wilderness. An angel of God calls Hagar by name in direct opposition to her previous experience. In verse 8, the verse continues, Where have you come from and where are you going? The questions aren't just about the situation at the moment. They are about her past and her future. And Hagar doesn't necessarily answer truthfully or completely. She states where she has come from, but does not say where she is going. And by focusing only on the past, Hagar confesses that she has no future. The angel's command to return and submit reverses Hagar's flight. To some, this command is insensitive and oppressive. The verse that follows, however, displays God's focus on Hagar's future. She won't return defenceless or with the same status. She will return with strong promises received directly and personally from God. Our underdog is being encouraged to fight, to have faith, and to trust in God. Elizabeth Tracy continues, Hagar, not a man, husband or a patriarch, also receives a covenant blessing in Genesis 16:10. I will increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count. She is only one of 4 people who gets to have this covenant directly from God. Unlike Abraham's more general promises in Genesis 12 and 15, the promise to Hagar has details supplied in Genesis 16:11, the first full birth annunciation. To To confirm this event, the angel tells Hagar, "Behold, you are pregnant." Statements like this usually refer to future pregnancies, not a present condition. And sometimes scholars often shift their focus to future of their commentaries from Hagar to her son. However, the meaning of the name Ishmael, God hears, forces us to focus back onto Hagar. God has heard of your afflictions, meaning Hagar's situation. Genesis 16 verse 13 is an extraordinary moment in Scripture. The narrator introduces Hagar's word with a striking expression afforded no one else. Hagar calls on the name of the Lord who spoke to her by literally calling God, "He sees me." Hagar testifies to her personal experience. And though the text is difficult for us to understand, it must be stressed that the sentence references a mutual seeing for both God and Hagar. "You are the God who sees me," she said. "I have now seen the one who sees me." The effect of claiming have to be seen by God is Hagar's way of asserting her personhood and a relationship with God that even Sarah doesn't have. When Hagar is removed physically from those who control every aspect of her life, a personal identity and relationship materialises. As Dr. Alexander writes, Hagar, by reason of the extremity of her sorrow, by reason of the utter desolateness and brokenness of her heart, and by reason of the sovereign grace and abounding mercy of God, Hagar, I say, stands out before us in every foremost rank of faith, trust, experience and assurance. Hagar to me stands out amongst God's very electest saints. Hagar has only one or two who can stand beside her in the discovery of God, in her nearness to God, in her face-to-face fellowship with God, in the instructiveness, in the comfort, and in the hopefulness of her close communion with God. The best and the most blessed of them was not more or better blessed than was Hagar, the polluted outcast on her knees, weeping. The pure in heart shall see God. As a socially marginalised woman, her most intimate relationship, it turns out, with God. Go Hagar! And this we can see in Genesis 21 verses 8 to 21, which is one of the readings for today.
Genesis 21 verses 8 to 21. Hagar and Ishmael sent away. The child grew and was weaned, and on the day Isaac was weaned, Abraham held a great feast. But Sarah saw the son whom Hagar the Egyptian had borne to Abraham was mocking, and she said to Abraham, "Get rid of that slave woman and her son, for that woman's son will never share in the inheritance of my son Isaac." The matter distressed Abraham greatly because it concerned his son. But God said to him, "Do not be so distressed about the boy and your slave woman. Listen to whatever Sarah tells you, because it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. I will make the son of the slave into a nation also, because he is your offspring." Early the next morning Abraham took some food and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar. He set them on her shoulders and then sent her off with the boy. She went on her way and wandered in the desert of Beersheba. When the water in the skin was gone, she put the boy under one of the bushes. Then she went off and sat down about a bowshot away, for she thought, "I cannot watch the boy die." And as she sat there, she began to sob. God heard the boy crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What is the matter, Hagar? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Lift the boy up and take him by the hand, for I will make him into a great nation." Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. So she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. God was with the boy as he grew up. He lived in the desert and became an archer. While he was living in the desert of Paran, his mother got a wife for him from Egypt. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Thank you, Ed. At the start of this reading, we see how life is beginning to turn out for Hagar. Sarah and Abraham have their desired child and have been reminded of God's unfathomable faithfulness. Hagar has Ishmael, who is probably now about 14 years old. and the tensions of this nightmare relationship is beginning to rear its ugly head. And in this passage, once again, we see the vulnerability of Hagar as she searches for the right path for Ishmael and herself. She is thrown out by Sarah due to the tensions and jealousies which are being manifested as Ishmael starts to taunt Isaac. Abraham is torn with the situation, but continues to listen to God, who promises nations for both Isaac and Ishmael. Look closely at verses 11 to 13. Do not be so distressed about the boy and your slave woman. Listen to whatever Sarah tells you, because it is through Isaac your offspring you will be reckoned. I will make the son of a slave into a nation also, because he is your offspring. So, in the early morning the following day, Abraham gives Hagar bread and water and lets her go. The verses which follow, Hagar is pouring out her heart with that intimate relationship with God that she has. At her weakest and most vulnerable, when the underdog looks to have lost the fight, God is there. God comes to her. And as her Bible name often sets forth features of character or history of those who bore them, so Ishmael, meaning God shall hear, was fully understood by Hagar, when in the wilderness God heard the moaning of her breaking heart. Herbert Lockyer, in his book All the Women of the Bible, sums up this passage beautifully. How painters and poets have seized upon this pathetic incident of the poor woman and her boy in the wilderness, thirst-ridden and ready to die. One of the finest masterpieces adorning the Dresden Gallery is a painting called Hagar in the Wilderness, and cold is the heart that can gaze upon it without deep emotion. The boy is pictured on his back, dying, while poor mother looks on in agonising prayer. She lifts up her voice and wept, "Let me not see the death of my child." Could anything be more poignant? True, Hagar has despised Sarah and mocked Isaac, but surely she has not deserved such cruel treatment as this. Death from hunger and thirst in a barren land. And as Lockyer continues, Hagar's extremity becomes God's opportunity. When the last drop of water had gone and Hagar tenderly places her almost dead boy under the shrubs, God heard the dying cry of the lad, and also the wail of Hagar's broken heart. For out of heaven came his voice, "Fear not, Hagar." God opened her eyes and she saw the well of water, and both she and her boy were saved from death. Abraham had given Hagar a bottle and it becomes empty. God gave her a well and Ishmael drinks from it. God was with him and he grows and becomes an archer in the wilderness. The last glimpse we have of Hagar in Genesis 21 is securing a wife for Ishmael back in her land of Egypt. It only remains to be said that Paul uses the story of Hagar as an allegory to distinguish law from grace. You refer to Galatians 4:21 to 31. Hagar, the slave, is contrasted with Sarah, the free woman, and Ishmael, born after flesh, with Isaac, born through promise. Freedom and grace appear as the characteristic qualities of Christianity. Hagar represents the Old Covenant, Sarah the New Covenant. Galatians 4:23. His son by the slave woman was born according to the flesh, but his son by the free woman was born the result of a divine promise. Whether she is to be seen as an allegory of the Old Covenant and to distinguish the difference between law and grace, I still see Hagar as a winner, an underdog who succeeds when things perhaps shouldn't have done. But for the love of God who speaks to her, who reaches out to her in the darkest hour. We've all been there, and some of us are in our darkest hour at the moment. But God equips Hagar just like he equips us. Dr. James Crichton, in his article, simply titled Hagar, concludes, "The life and experience of Hagar teach, among other truths, the temptations incident to a new position, the foolishness of a hasty action in times of trial and difficulty, the care exercised over the lonely by the all-seeing God, the divine purpose in the life of everyone, however obscure and friendless. How God works out his gracious purpose by seemingly harsh methods, and the strength, comfort and encouragement that ever accompany the hardest experiences of his children. May God continue to bless you at this time. May you see the story of Hagar in a new way, and may God give you those opportunities to reveal his purpose for your life. God bless. Amen.